It is time for another edition of Between Two Cacti with Energy Institute Director Brian Korgel and our special guest today, Luke Bassett, Senior Advisor and Director of the Policy and Program Impact of the Inflation Reduction Act Program Office at the United States Treasury. So as soon as they are ready, they will come onto the stage whenever they're ready, and we will welcome them. And after this, we'll have a break. So here we go. Brian and Luke, thank you. Let's welcome them to the stage.
Cool. So thanks for coming to another Between Two Cacti. Really happy to have Luke Bassett here. He's from the Department of Treasury. I printed out my 1040 because tax day is coming up. Since you're the apparently Senior Advisor, Director of Policy and Program Impact, Inflation Reduction Act Program Office, U.S. Department of Treasury, so you must know something about taxes. So I got my 1040 here. I had a question about like a box or two. Can you help me with a couple things? Or
As a Treasury official, I cannot provide tax advice. That's the disclaimer we always have to give, but good news. Texas is actually one of 12 states that is a pilot state for the IRS's new program, Direct File, where you can use your phone or your laptop, log on, and if you file a W-2, some of the other really simple forms of filing your taxes, you can do it for free. It's simple, straightforward. It is truly like one of the best things the IRS has done, and it's in Texas. So when you think about filing your taxes, if you have a simple return, check out directfile.irs.gov. That is part of my job, but I think we're mostly here to talk about energy and
that's right.
The energy incentives.
Inflation Reduction Act stuff. Yeah, that's why we're here. So Luke has this amazing career path, and I first got to know Luke when he zoomed in virtually last year in our Energy Ventures course that we put together, and these students were learning about energy policy, and Luke was talking about the infrastructure bill, Inflation Reduction Act, and the thing that struck me is Luke was actually working on it with Senator Manchin, and so you worked on the Chips and Sciences Act, Infrastructure Bill, Inflation Reduction Act, and then by the time we talked at Energy Week last week, you no longer work with Senator Manchin, so we could talk. And then after Energy Week, I found out that now Luke worked for Department of Treasury, actually working on the guidelines for the Inflation Reduction Act. So that was fascinating to me, and I thought, I need to have you back, and I want to ask you about your journey, what's happening right now. So yeah, maybe you can, just tell us a little bit about that career transition. You're from West Virginia. Senator Manchin is from West Virginia as well. And so, yeah, I mean, why did you decide to transition to Treasury? And I will back up a little bit. Before Senator Manchin, you worked at Department of Energy as well. So you've had this career path doing very important things, I think, in the energy space that have been very relevant and impactful. So tell us a little bit about that, about why Department of Treasury, what inspired that? Well,
thanks for inviting me back, and thanks to the Energy Institute and the university. I think I am from West Virginia. My roots are there. Family-wise, we don't even do a genealogy because we are just from the state. I think like a lot of people, and one of my former colleagues is here in the audience. So I think the team that worked for Senator Manchin, whether or not you're from West Virginia, he is just incredible about instilling that family mentality and really deep sense of customer service, constituent service back to folks in the Mountain State. And it was hard to leave. I loved my job. I loved the team, loved working for him. But as you noted, we were in an incredible 4-year sprint of first working in the 2 years when he was ranking member of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee alongside Chairman Murkowski on what became the Energy Act. So a number of authorization bills, which is where Congress writes, this is what agencies could do when and if we, the Congress, fund them to do it. So we put together a really huge authorization bill across the entire Department of Energy and parts of the Department of the Interior too. And at the end of that, we thought, this is incredible. It got across the finish line. It is now law. We should call it a day. And he became the 50th vote in the Senate. And we immediately went into working on the law that became the bipartisan infrastructure law. We developed a large number of programs in that law. Simultaneously, the CHIPS and Science Act was moving through on a different track, and I helped with the basic research part of that. And then ultimately, we also worked on what became the Inflation Reduction Act. And throughout all of that, there was a steady theme of what can we do to help both people in West Virginia, but also people in communities like where we're from. So you see that in a lot of the place-based policies that came out in the IRA and the other laws, things that are focused on coal communities or energy communities, things that are focused on bringing the types of jobs that Senator Manchin thought were important to bring through federal investment to those places. And so, it does go all the way back to working at Department of Energy and some of the other places that I've worked in my career, because I had the sort of understanding of what policy tools were out there. At this point in the history of working on climate policy, we have a lot of solutions. There are still policy solutions that are drafted in bill form, ready to go. And it's really those moments where consensus comes together, the vote count is right, that things move forward. And if you take a look at any of the laws that have passed, from the Energy Act in the 116th Congress to the 3 major laws in the 117th, it was a lot of compromise, but it was seizing the right opportunity. And I think part of going back to my roots in West Virginia and working for Senator Manchin, he wanted to do stuff. It's a state that produces a lot of hardworking, focused people, whether they're coal miners or glass blowers or timber cutters, loggers, healthcare workers, or folks like me who, are maybe a little more progressive than some of my home state folks, but at the same time, want to get stuff done and help people back home. So it was an amazing job, and the transition was tough. Going to Treasury.
Yeah, why the Treasury?
Going to Treasury.
You couldn't get enough of the Inflation Reduction Act.
It turns out that the tax credits passed in the law are some of the biggest tools that we have now to build clean energy equipment, help consumers get equipment for their homes, help small businesses start up and get the right investment. And the tax credits are hopefully going to be a portfolio that we can all sort of figure out how to use and really change the economy. So it's a really incredible opportunity to work with colleagues in a very different agency and sort of help move the ball forward on climate change and a lot of investment across the United States.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So in your role, I wonder, how much, since you've got that historical background and you were part of drafting the legislation, right? So we have a lot of discussion about 45V with the clean hydrogen production tax credit with High Velocity Hub. It's a big deal. I don't know how much you can say specifically about that, but I'm really curious to know, when did clean hydrogen become a topic for you? Did you walk into Senator Manchin's office and he was like, "Hey, have you heard of clean hydrogen before?" I mean, how did all of that? How did hydrogen become such a topic? I get asked this all the time. What do I think about hydrogen? I'm curious how it originated in your role.
I don't think there was any one moment. It wasn't like a light bulb turned on necessarily for anyone on staff or anyone in the Senate even. But I think, there were hearings about clean energy. When you are on committee staff or you're running a committee as a senator, you try to cover a lot of the topics that are relevant to the agencies that the committees oversee. And you do that by bringing in people from the agency, but then experts from industry or relevant nonprofits, think tanks. So they talk about what's new, what technologies are doing great, or what the next big thing could be. Hydrogen was one of those topics. I think you all may know a little bit about it. It is incredibly versatile as a fuel, an energy carrier, a feedstock, potentially energy storage. It just goes on and on with the chemistry and the physics and the uses of what we could do with hydrogen. So he was immediately interested in the flexibility of hydrogen. Then in terms of the legislative process, the bipartisan infrastructure law process started without immediately involving a lot of the committee chairs. Senator Sinema and Senator Portman were the two who partnered on some of the framework that initiated the process. And then they sort of, bipartisan processes at the senator level, at the member level, start, 2 by 2, and then they add some senators from each side, and you sort of get buy-in and build toward getting the right number of votes to get something across the finish line. At some point, the members had a meeting, and they would only bring like one staff to these conversations, and they kept talking about hydro. They really, one person wanted hydro for this, and one person wanted hydro for that.
They thought they were talking about hydrogen
when it came back to committee staff to start drafting provisions, there's a little lack of clarity about whether it was funding for hydropower,
hydro with Jen and a hypothesis.
We clarified it, and we have provisions for hydrogen and provisions for hydropower, and so we move forward. It's sort of
y'all know hydro is water, like
right.
So, okay.
So there was a need to do both in a clear sense, and the hubs, I think, I worked a little bit with a colleague on our team in developing the language, and I think there was again this interest in thinking through how, sort of from what an ideal end stage of what a hub might look like, from production through transmission or transportation of the fuel and storage through end uses. And as you see through the committee history or the hearings, there are a lot of different uses, there are a lot of different ways to produce it, and there are a lot of questions around the safety and the corrosion of pipelines or storage units. So all of those questions were in play, and so the hub idea became a way to sort of group and kind of have optionality and think through all of that at a big scale so that you could actually demonstrate, the benefits or costs, both in terms of financial costs, but also environmental and social benefits for each of those production methods. Try to address some of the safety and sort of material science issues and the end uses too. So
why $8 billion?
I'm not the person who did the math on that one.
Yeah, why 8 billion and 4? There's a lot of magic math, like what defines clean hydrogen, 2 kilograms of CO2. I mean, there was a lot of thought into specificity of what was in there. Like, why $8 billion?
There's also a lot of, with that set of provisions and really all of the work that we did, there was a lot of back and forth with the national laboratories, the Department of Energy. So I'd have to look back into my email archives or the National Archives to really figure that out. But I think, there's always a lot of input from scientific experts, whether they're in government or outside of government, on the standard setting part. And then there are always estimates about, what the cost of a hub might look like, and then covering the different options, you start to multiply costs and you get to an authorization or an allocation number. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, it certainly got everybody's attention. It was enough to get us involved, us as a community.
I am no longer involved because I don't work at the Department of Energy, but I know I followed it and a lot of their other funding announcements, and it's incredible what they're doing. I mean, across a lot of the programs in the bill, the hydrogen hubs, it's really exciting work. So,
yeah.
Congratulations, I hope.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I mean, you and I have talked a little bit, leading up to this about what some of the most exciting things you think are coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act, and we talked about, some of the opportunities for new entrants into energy project development and finance planning, especially nonprofit entities, maybe universities. I've been thinking about what kind of new opportunities are there for UT now. Can you talk a little bit about this and what is direct pay and things like that?
Yeah, there's a lot to cover. The tax code is becoming incredibly exciting.
My 10-4, I learned
that
you
is
can
and is
almost
not a
file,
laugh line, but
electronically.
the Inflation Reduction Act, it does a lot of things both for new entrants and existing companies and existing taxpayers. So one of the major features is it is a 10-year bill granted from the date of enactment. So it sends a signal that investors can think and plan ahead for the timeline needed to do the permitting and construction for projects to place them into service and then file taxes and get a tax credit. It also established entirely new mechanisms that open the doors for new entrants. So the one that is, I think, most exciting is this notion of elective pay or direct pay. Elective, the word refers to new entrants, so tax-exempt entities. And there's a list in the law of other entities that are included. That includes state and local governments, tribal governments, and then specific ones like rural electric cooperatives and the Tennessee Valley Authority, some that are maybe not quite as relevant to Texas, but the reason for this provision is historically these tax credits were based on tax equity or tax liability. So as a business, you got profits, you owed taxes, and the credit would go against the taxes owed. So if you were building a solar farm or a geothermal plant and you got money back based on the 30% investment tax credit at the time, that would go against the taxes paid. But in the case of tax-exempt entities like a rural co-op, they don't pay taxes. So they're running their operations, they want to maybe invest in that same geothermal plant, but there wasn't the incentive to do so through the tax code. So direct pay changes that equation. It enables these tax-exempt entities to pursue, plan, finance, build, and place those projects into service. And then through a few steps of working with the IRS, they do a pre-filing registration, the IRS returns, checks all of the math. That's to prevent fraud on the front end. And then they file, sometimes for the first time ever, file their taxes and receive the amount of the tax credit back in a tax-free cash payment. So if you think of tax-exempt entities, whether it's the rural co-ops that I mentioned or universities, school districts, state and local governments, this provision applies to 12 tax credits. Again, it's a portfolio, a smaller subset of all of the tax credits in the IRA, but it really unlocks new capital, new investment, and entirely new project developers. So we think that it's maybe the most exciting part of the IRA. It's a big part of our outreach so that people who've never encountered the tax code can think through it and realize oh yeah, I can be saving money on my electricity bills or building charging stations in my church parking lot. There's a lot of flexibility in it, and we hope that people see it as a huge open door to pursuing these projects.
Do you have a sense that the rural co-ops in, say, West Texas know about these new rules? Or?
I know that the trade association, the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, or NRECA, helped think through direct pay. They made arguments in the legislative process about exactly what I was saying. Like, we've never been able to get these tax incentives. And it was a very clear message that was very powerful across the footprint of rural co-ops is vast. If you look at the map of the territory they serve, it is a huge part of the country. And again, it speaks to people who are making a living in rural America and want to get clean energy or lower energy bills, and it just made a lot of sense to the members.
Yeah, that's. I think that's really exciting. I mean, it's hard to see the headline for direct pay. 501c3 you could benefit, but I mean, it sounds amazing. How about for the general homeowner or landowner? Are there any things we should be paying attention to there?
A lot, yeah.
Okay.
A lot. So, the consumer credit side of it, basically, if you live in a building, you have opportunities as renters now, as owners. You have opportunities if you own or are developing commercial buildings to think through a lot of the equipment and the building envelope, to pursue home energy audits to get a sense of whether your home has insulation or needs it or is drafty. You might need new windows. There's a whole portfolio of a menu of consumer credits, and you see that, and then you also see states moving forward with different options on their rebate programs. That also is being backed up by a program at DOE to help states develop those programs. So there's a lot of sort of woven together incentives for consumers, for buildings and homes. And then in addition to that, there are all of the electric vehicle incentives and the clean fuels. And so there's the transportation aspect as well as the buildings and homes aspect too.
Yeah, fascinating. I know we have some students here. I'm just curious, did you set out on a career path to sort of do what you do? I'm going to go to DOE, then I'm going to work for a senator mansion or whoever, and then go work for Department of Treasury. Was that anything? It seems like maybe you followed your passion a little bit, but yeah, do you have any words of advice for students who think what you've done is exciting and might want to do something similar, or
Sure.
or things to avoid? But.
It's great to be here in an audience with students and to be among former classmate and roommate and former coworker, and I think the part that has driven me forward in a lot of my work has been a mix of just intellectual curiosity. Climate change and energy policy and the politics around it is just absolutely endlessly fascinating. You probably see that in classrooms and labs here, but working in the Department of Energy, you could call the person who invented the widget that you had a question about, because they're probably in a national laboratory or connected somehow through DOE's funding or National Science Foundation. You could find the person who had invented the thing every day. And so that was endlessly fascinating as a more junior part of my career. And the policy part of it is tough. I mean, there are people with very strong opinions in very different directions on all of these issues. And, I think the fun part of it is trying to bring those people together and figure out a solution, whether there is overlap or not. But I think between the intellectual curiosity part of it and the sort of deep sense of fulfillment that I got from working, my parents still live in West Virginia, so I was kind of working for my mom and dad in a very indirect way. So, there is like a tie to community in public service, even working in a federal agency in the executive branch. Public service is amazing. It is hard work, and at the same time, it's deeply fulfilling to see some of that work affect people's lives, even if you don't necessarily have the ability to give them the advice, tax advice, to go do it and do something. So, yeah, I think the clearest advice I can give is follow both what keeps you engaged and curious about what you're working on, and helps reinforce those ties to what brought you here in the first place, whether that's your community or an intellectual reason. But bringing this together helps overcome a lot of stress in the workplace or adversity or what have you. So,
Awesome. Maybe, I don't know, I think we started slightly late. Maybe we have time for one question if anyone has a burning question for Luke.
Got two. Any guidance on when low-income bonus tax credit process is going to be automated?
automated. That's it. So normally we get questions just about when guidance is coming out or what have you. So that's a little bit of a
I'm just reading the
curveball.
question.
That is a great question, and I will take it back to
Okay.
the team that
Okay.
works on.
So second one that I'm going to sneak in is new fossil fuel employment rules lead to this question about the ITC energy adders. Areas are established yearly. When will the new data changes or communities be released?
So the best answer I can give is the list of energy communities was published, I believe, so the previous list was published in May of 2023. And we recently updated that. So there was a notice that came out, I believe, last week. I've been in and out of work a little bit on travel. I think it was last Friday they came out and updated the list pursuant to some additional changes to the notice. But the energy communities list is the census tracts that are relevant to a 10% bonus credit when projects are located in energy communities, so relevant to coal mine closures, coal power plant closures, brownfield sites, and a category of areas that are related to both high percentages of fossil fuel employment, but also unemployment and a high percentage of state and local revenue from fossil fuel development. So guiding investment back to those communities so that there's economic diversification and clean energy projects being developed.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Luke. I really appreciate you coming out. And
Thanks for having me.
putting up with me trying to get you to do my taxes, but I had to try. I think we've had different panels today talking. We had folks from the journalism side, from the media, and we have all of these researchers, and we have folks from industry, and I think you represent a way that people can make change, work towards positive change in a very real way. So I really appreciate you sharing your stories with us.
Thanks. I appreciate that.